Very good. And thank you all for joining. Uh, as Beth said, yeah, being on this world tour, I just came back from presenting in the Netherlands on the World Association of Lesson Study conference and being able to work with some coaches and head teachers in London. And then our student-focused coaching model is going to be used in an upcoming randomized control trial research project in Melbourne, Australia. So super excited in terms of what's happened with the book. And my hope is that for our time together here today, that you will walk away with some ideas here to think about as an instructional coach, an administrator, a peer colleague, whomever, of just different ways to think about when we're engaging with text and we're thinking about students who might be uh, struggling behind, need to be pushed a little bit more, that you'll walk away with a lot of good, just different ideas, resources, etc. Along with some different ways to just approach maybe some sustained professional learning. And so on the Oregon RTI the website, there are some of these things that I was looking at of how reflect on creating a healthy school culture. And I thought, oh, that'd be really interesting here to just to ponder here a bit of a couple of these key ideas that I was reading and let you do some reflection of this. I want to then dive into a brief overview of the collaborative problem solving process, but this is going to be really more about us engaging in an experience. I'm going to be using a poem that we will engage with, but I want to be able to kind of model and work through if using this in a tier one classroom, and if I'm a coach or working with peer colleagues, like how can we look at some text in varying ways to then think about the reinforcement and the support for students who may need tier two intervention, who might need tier three intervention? How could this be used as a sustained professional learning plan? But my real goal is for us to be able to think how when we're engaging with text, it's not always about how much can we read really quickly and not about content coverage, but really the depth here of the content that we can engage with. So I want to start by having you go to chat, if you would. And these there are no right or wrong answers here. I just simply want to get some of your insight as to what do you think about when you see some of these quick statements here. So the first one that I want to pose, if I can get this thing here to move, the first thing I want to pose is from Motes in 2020, that shared responsibility and belief that we can teach all kids to read. When we think about a healthy school culture, whether you're a coach, an administrator, peer, colleague, what does this mean to you? That a shared responsibility and belief that we can teach all kids to read. If you just go to chat really quick and do a quick type, what does this mean to you? How do you make this happen? Okay. Everyone. Yeah. Everyone is. We all have standards about reading. High expectations, collaboration. Yeah, yeah, I know. Should be a belief, right? I know, Amy there. Yeah, okay. So this responsibility, right? That this is a shared responsibility, and we have to create what this culture actually looks like. How do we explicitly create this of what it looks like and what it sounds like if we truly believe that this can be the case? Okay, here comes the second one of creating this healthy school culture, that there is a growth mindset and desire for continuous improvement through feedback. I want you to really think. Carol Dweck, I just shared this, and I'll share with you guys of a new podcast that she just came out with, and this was last month. but powerful when I think about how we can throw words around, but do we really know what these words mean? So, growth mindset. I hear people internationally throw this term around or this phrase, but I'm not sure we all always quite know what it means. So, if you're creating this healthy school culture, what does it mean then? What does it look like to have a growth mindset and desire for continuous improvement? Student ownership of learning. Yes, Julie, it's great. Building relationships. Yes. Feedback. Willingness to change. Huh? Yeah, that's an important one, right, Amy? Rather than a fixed mindset. So thinking of our willingness to change. Um, room for improvement. Yep. And keep going, all kinds of things here, what we need, data. Okay. So we have two big things here about shared responsibility. Then we have this growth mindset and desire for continuous improvement. Okay, here comes the third one. There are four total. If you're creating a healthy school culture, what does it look like or mean if then there's this healthy and positive atmosphere of collaboration amongst staff? What does that look like? What does that sound like in creating this healthy school culture? Yes, trust, vulnerability, trust and confidentiality, two cornerstones of coaching. Shared, oh, I like that shared efficacy. The time to connect. Yes. Jan and I talk about this in our definition of student-focused coaching. Uh, with coaching, it's cooperative, ideally collaborative. It's a loaded term when we think of collaboration. So how do we get people to even want to cooperate with us and to work with us, to understand what we each bring to the table, and then ultimately working toward this collaboration. Yes, they are all our kids, and that's what we're all here for. The safe space. Can we take risks? Yes. Okay, and then the last one. If creating a culture, a healthy school culture, and then thinking about the culturally responsive teaching. So, what does it look like? What does it sound like when we are using students, their customs, their experiences, etc., to really enhance learning in the classroom? What does that look like? How do we get to this? Connections, honoring everyone. Yes. Yeah, there's one. Curiosity. Can we be present and curious, not to have answers, but yeah, how do we create that space of being curious, asset based, Greater Albany Public Schools, how important that is, being asset based, not, as Mitchell said as well, deficit mindset, thinking things positively, that active, deep, authentic listening. So I wanted to start with this to really think about this healthy school culture. And if you can keep these sort of in the forefront of your mind as we continue to move forward, and to really think about the experiences that I engage you in today around this poem and how we break this down into manageable chunks to really try to think about what does this look like when we're supporting or we're planning for this high quality tier one instruction? What if students do struggle a little bit? How could we use the same text in a way to reinforce and continue to practice in a tier two small group? So these are the kind of things that I want us to be able to think about as we move forward. Now, I pulled up, just so you have access, and if you don't already have this, of this MTSS framework within Oregon, of when you think of all of these pieces, that inclusive and equitable culture the capacity that we're building with individuals, how we're all working together. In student focused coaching, it is all about how we ground our decisions in student data and our evidence. It's we're mutually engaged. No one has more power or authority. It's not evaluative, it's not supervision driven. We all have things that we bring to the table. We can learn something from everyone. And the QR that code there will take you to this particular piece if you want to learn more. Also, that I thought was really important here to just think about this as we get into our experience is to be able to think in these different levels of as you're going through the experience with the poem of how you think about what's happening if we're delivering this like a tier one experience. How do we model this and practice this with our peer colleagues? But then having those deeper conversations of if we took this same piece and now had someone working with students in tier two, what would that look like? What are the skills that we might want to address? What might be some resources of where we would go to get this additional support? And so this QR code as well takes you to kind of a additional information here from the Oregon RTII about the different levels, but that's what we're going to be digging into. The collaborative problem-solving process, as mentioned here a little earlier, and I'm not going to go into great depth. This is really about 4 chapters in the book because it's the centerpiece, but how all things are grounded by data. In the collaborative problem-solving process in this role, we're always looking at all of those white circles. If somebody comes to me with a problem, they might have so much information. Every circle is representing a little bit of detail somebody might provide me. And if you've ever engaged with someone who's come to you with a problem, you might be thinking that, oh, yeah, there's always so much information that I have to try to make sense of. In student focused coaching and the collaborative problem solving process, that first phase, the intent is to just listen. To ask questions, to have conversation, to be an investigator, but to do no solving of problems, offering no strategies, no solutions, because it really is bits of information that we're taking. The question marks there help us to really think that if we're really going to try to get to a clear problem, we need to be thinking about data triangulation. And so, whether you're an administrator, a coach, teachers working together, what additional data might we collect to say, you know what, this problem that I presented, it really is a problem, or this problem I presented, it's not supported by other data. So all the more reasons why we don't just look for a number on a spreadsheet, but we think about the multiple sources. Good decisions are made, data triangulations, minimum of 3 data sources that we want to look for. If we've collected all of this additional data, you then see all these other little patterns here in phase 2. Lots of things are likely going to come out when you put out all the data in front of you and look at this. And so as we look at it, we're going to either confirm and validate the initial problem from phase 1, or it's going to be something different. But moving into more of the straight vertical line, we start to really narrow our focus. And likely, we're going to come up with a problem that's represented in all of these different data sources, whether that's coming from records review, it's coming from interviews with students, it's coming from observing classroom ecology, things in classrooms, and so on. But this is going to lead us to the important defining of a problem, setting of goals, and then really thinking about where do we go? Where do we go from here? The implementation phase is then the really important part that we're all in this together, as someone said in the chat. This is about coach working with teacher, teachers working with teachers. We're all in this together. But it's also a real opportunity for us to think then about the sustained opportunities to continue to learn and to continue to teach. And that's what we're going to really hone our attention on. So I wish there was more time to take a deep dive into the collaborative problem solving process. That, though, is certainly another day here. Um, when then we think about why is this even important to spend quality time on helping teachers to really think about explicitly teaching something. We could all think about a three-tier model, an MTSS plan, and receive a quick 45-minute one-day training on what this is. In reality, that's likely never going to get implemented because Joyce and Showers, here from back in 1982, uh, told us at that point in time from their conclusions of what it takes to learn about and implement a new skill or strategy. And you can see if we're trying to really hone in on something about tier one instruction, we've got to get really focused here. And simply talking about it is not going to be helpful. So how do we take the opportunity to introduce teachers to tier one instruction and what really is meant by tier one instruction? We're aiming for a minimum of 80% of students who are demonstrating understanding during tier one instruction. That's our high quality using our evidence-based materials. But that's going to also take us some time to really educate others of what does it look like? What does that sound like? How do I plan this? How do I organize this? Uh, and the opportunities to really see more out to the demonstrations in practice. But we also have to have the ongoing support. And whether you're administrator, a coach, or a peer colleague, thinking about how you can work together to support each other over time and learning about what people are doing. What can you use? What did you see? It's not so much about as Joyce and Showers remove feedback from their peer coaching model because it was crossing the line as evaluation, but we still can learn a lot from each other. And that's what did I see? What did I learn? What can I take without having to put things back on teacher behaviors? So you can see then long term, if we're really looking for this long term use, we have to figure out these ways to get the coaching continuously there, whether that's us and as peer coaches. That could be what our professional learning community is all about. Every time we're coming together, we're practicing. Every time we're coming together, we're seeing a demonstration. We're discussing something specific and not always doing something different. And so that's where I want us to sort of go with our session then from here on out. And this is going to be all about then getting you engaged in this work. So I want to start then by having you can go to that QR code there at the bottom if you'd like. That QR code will take you to a document that I've always find very helpful, and that came from about 10 years ago from the 95% group, and this comprehension continuum. And the thought that if we continue to sort of think through this as a comprehension continuum, if we look at our data, and if we were looking at things on that collaborative problem solving process in which someone looked at a score and said, yep, we're struggling with making inferences, that sure is the problem. And then you look at something like this and you say, well, there are a lot of other building blocks. There are a lot of other scaffolds. There are a lot of other skills that are needed in order to be able to make a good inference. And so that might help us in our phase one collaborative problem solving process of simply being able to go off and to look for evidence. How does your teacher teach making inferences? Is there evidence of any kind of a mentor text, anchor charts that demonstrate making inferences? What does a teacher say about how they explicitly teach this? Do they use some of these scaffolds? But you can see right there, hopefully, of all the possibilities, all the additional information we can collect before we start to really kind of paint a picture here. And it may be that where we end up starting is back at connecting. We might find through all of the data sources we collect that the problem isn't about making inferences. The problem is that students don't have the background knowledge nor the vocabulary to make sense of the text that they're reading. And that could be in any subject area. We might find that students really are struggling with questioning. Maybe they can't visualize, create these mental images. So I want you to think about these different levels of this continuum. And as we go through and we work on this piece with this poem, I'm going to be asking you to make some connections here. Uh, what part of this continuum might we be targeting? What part of the continuum are you finding evidence for? And if you can jot those notes down as we go of some very specific evidence, that's going to be helpful if we start to then engage in a conversation of what you saw and what you could use, not I didn't see you doing this, or you could do better with that. So get a good look here, or take a screenshot, or use your 3 slides per page handout to be able to really look at these different parts. And then we're going to then get into this piece. Now, I'm going to do a couple of things here as we get going, and I'll bring the slides back up here. But I'm going to use in a bit. I'm going to use this though first as this old man poem. And if you look at the old man poem that you have in your handouts, or you can see here, we're going to just look at the very first stanza here. The division there with the blank line before moving into the second. And so I'm going to read this. I'm going to talk just a little bit about what what I what I see. So I have here at the top Old Man by Ricardo Sanchez. Old man with brown skin, talking of past when being shepherd in Utah, Nevada, Colorado, and New Mexico was life lived freely. I want you to sort of paint a picture in your mind of what could that possibly look like. And if you want to go to the chat, don't read any further, just this first stanza. But if you go into chat and just think about that first stanza, what kind of picture are you painting in your mind about this old man? What kind of picture might you paint? Old man with brown skin, talking of past and being shepherd. In Utah, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico was life lived freely. If you go to chat, type in your thought, what kind of picture are you painting in your mind? Hmm. Nice, Beth. What are others thinking? Mental image, picture that you might be creating. A grandpa sitting on his porch. Oh, that's interesting, Lisa. Life etched in his face. Nature. So much life to share. All kinds of things of where our minds might be taking us, and maybe from some of the background, our background knowledge that we bring. Now, I could, as just trying to get you to create some of these ideas. What do people already bring? Getting what's in your head on paper, and in this case, in chat. But if just tried to get you to communicate something here thus far. Now, I could show you maybe some additional things here to help you with your own background knowledge of thinking about a shepherd. How like what hard work that must be. But look at that nature, land. I could talk to you a little bit about just like where these states are located. So there are a number of things here that maybe just to help build a little bit of background knowledge that I might want to include. Now let me go to the next stanza here. Then the next stanza that we have of old man, grandfather, wise with time, running rivulets on face, deep, rich furrows, each one a legacy, deep, rich memories of life. You are Indio, among other things, he would tell me, during nights spent so long ago amidst familial gatherings in Albuquerque. Think about some of the things. Think about these other two pictures. Think about who this might be. Old man, grandfather. If you go to chat and continue to think about just what you're visualizing in your mind, this old man, this grandfather, uh, wise with time, running rivulets. What does that even mean? Does it look anything like this picture? But what are you envisioning? Ah, connection. Great, Julie, there in terms of connection to a book. What are others thinking? Images that you're creating. As more ideas come in here, we'll kind of address a couple of things. We built some knowledge here. If this were a tier one classroom instruction, think of all the conversations that could be had right now. This visualization of an old man, this visualization of an old man with brown skin, this visualization of what it means or what it's like to be a shepherd. And what does it mean to live life freely? Uh, we have this grandfather now that we're talking about. We have rivulets. Hmm. What if I didn't know what a rivulet was on the face? I could talk about rivulet as a small stream. I could divide this into syllables, rivulet, and have our suffix. Uh, Plural, multiple things, multiple rivulets. Deep, rich furrows. Furrows are these narrow trenches. Look at his face. On his face, you see these trenches, these like small streams running down his face. Each one of these being this legacy, a legacy being this long lasting impact, something of these deep, rich memories that he's had. This man who of Indio descent, indigenous people, uh, as Lisa has said here in chat, people as indigenous peoples as a Spanish term for Indian people. Uh, Take just that much so far. These first two stanzas, that's it. And in chat, if you type what's already starting to happen here, if I were really thinking about how do I work my way through the design of a lesson that's helping students think about comprehension in this continuum. So if you'd go to chat, type in any kind of evidence here thus far of what have you noticed in just two stanzas? Connections to prior knowledge, yes. Vocabulary, pictures, so connections, yes. Asking questions, yep, background knowledge, okay. Yeah, right, Amy. Yeah, the imaging. What are the types of things that you're seeing? And this has only been with two stanzas. So I think the power of this, like sometimes of thinking about how do we take some of these things and really slow down content uh, to then be able to work through some of these examples. What about the next part? If we were to think about old man, loved and respected, he would speak sometimes of pueblos, San Juan, Santa Clara, and even Santo Domingo. And his family, he would say, came from there. Some of our blood was here, he would say, before the coming of Coronado. Other of our blood came of Los Españoles, and the mixture was rich, though often painful. We could talk some about coming of Coronado, demanding these as Native Americans to convert to Christianity. We could talk some about the killing of Native Americans during this expedition, but more opportunities here to continue to make our own thinking visible within this particular poem. And then there's the last part. about old man who knew earth by its awesome aromas and who felt the heated sweetness of chili verde by his supple touch. Gone into dust is your body, with its stoic look and resolution by your reality, old man. But your reality, old man, lives on, in a mind soul touched by you. If you think of just that, mind soul, this non-physical aspect of a human being, this supple, flexible, being able to think, uh, bending and moving easily. But there's a lot of rich vocabulary here that could continue to be reinforced and looked at. And what I want to ask you then to think about is, if this were, even if you took just kind of the first part of this poem, and if you started to think about if this is something that was covered in tier one instruction, and you were to take a look at some of these parts of the poem, what could be done with students who might need a little bit more support in a tier two group? How could you take and use the same poem in a tier two small group to support student instruction? If you want to go to chat, if you want to think about that, what are some of the other skills that could be addressed here if I were to take this into a tier two small group instruction? Yeah, great, Elisa. Yeah, Stephanie. Line by line. Free teaching book, yes. Yes. And the other thing is, if anyone wants to come off of mute, if you look at these different elements, this is this is taking some work both from Brock Rosenshine's work, but it also takes in from Anita Archer's work. When we think about explicit instruction and elements, now we could spend a lot more time on the poem. What I'm looking for here is for us to think about, if I were in this position of teaching students, or if I'm in a position of teaching teachers, what elements here might I have modeled, or could I have modeled in a way that helps people think that it isn't about, in tier one, how fast can we read through content and get this finished up, but what are some of the elements here that are evident from just this one experience? So you can type it in chat, you can come off mute, but what are some of the things that you see? Beth, do you want to say a little bit about that? What do you mean by material and small steps?
The way you shared it stanza by stanza made it more accessible and built that they were able to build that visualization stanza by stanza instead of reading the whole thing and saying, hey, what does this mean?
Yeah. So it's not, getting through the whole poem and then trying to figure out, what was this? What were we meaning here? What are some other things that were evident in this piece about explicit instruction? If this were a tier one text that we were using, asking questions. Okay. Stephanie, you want to come off mute and say anything more about that at all? Like, what do you mean? Like, do you have any specific questions that were asked or anything about vocabulary?
Well, with the imagery portion, you asked us, what comes to mind? What are you seeing? You allowed us to think about that. Then provided us some examples with some pictures. And then with the vocabulary, the rivulets, and then you broke down the word. You provided a picture example again. So perhaps you prepared us and prepped us, and then you were prepared to also present on that vocabulary word.
Great. What about Kim? Do you have any specific example, if you want to come off mute, a specific example in which it was guided and or supported?
So as you break it down and like go through each stanza, like you did as you read it, and you think about, slow down and you like have them visually think about like an old man with brown skin.
Mm.
You know, like visualize that and get them to like kind of describe that,
Yeah.
their words, what that would be. Um, you know, do they know where Utah, Colorado
Yeah.
states are? And then
Yeah.
show them on a map where they are.
Yeah.
Um, taking these words, rivulets, furrows, um, and supporting them in their meetings so that they get true understanding of the meanings, like, you know, in his face,
Mhm.
actually showing where the, you know, the rivets are in his face with their meaning.
Yeah. Yeah, great. So there's a lot of things, and yes, Beth, like thinking about like some students who are going to need that extra support. And this is the when we think of on like my work as well with the multi-tier system supports with schools creating their plans. It's so much about like how do we help people really understand what does this stuff look like, and not just a quick here's what we know about the a three-tier model. Here's what we know about tier one instruction of really working through, but what does this actually look like when we're trying to model the work? These are two things of just both QR codes. It's in the 3 slides per page handout as well, of thinking about when we're considering some of the explicit instruction, which you also have there from Anita Archer's work. But there's so much to be thinking around, whether you're elementary or secondary, of what does it look like? How many of us have really had an opportunity to see things modeled over and over and over again with our colleagues of what does it look like when really planning out tier one instruction? How many of us have had opportunities for continuous time to see people demonstrate the thinking of what goes in from beginning to end of a lesson? How many of us have had time to practice with our colleagues of what it's like to plan the opening of a lesson, the body, the closing, all of these opportunities for that explicit teaching, the instruction, that if we can all be mutually engaged here and share some of the practices that we use. Now, if students struggle, these are the things that I want to start. Just if you have the poem right there and you're looking at it, of in tier one instruction, of course, how we can in tier one, so much of how we could use our small group time to go back and reinforce for some, depending upon what's needed, for the additional fluency practice, more vocabulary. It could be in tier two that we decide that, you know what, we have to relate this to our grade level content. But there as well, when we're helping people understand the relationships from tier one to tier two, that doesn't mean new programs. It could mean the same content. We're going to use the same poem, but now we're going to do some other practice. And what might be some other skills that students should struggle with to support comprehension? That's not just let's keep doing things with inferring or whatever, but could we do some work with vocabulary? Could we do some work with syllable types? Could we do some work with uh, 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 just prefixes, suffixes, root words, base words? There's so many things here that could be involved. And if it's tier three, think of how far back we might really have to go to consider that scaffolding of instruction, to think about looking at our curriculum, thinking about our environmental space that we have, but also really the individualized need of students. So the other thing that I thought was really interesting here is planning for this session of how when we look at things like Common Core standards, or any of the state standards you might have, you could go to some of those specific areas of comprehension and really get a solid understanding of what's expected from kindergarten through 12th grade. How do we help teachers, or how do teachers use those standards to really think vertically? Uh, and do we really even know? I often struggle with this, even in conversations with teachers whom I'm working with, is that sometimes standards are so ambiguous. It's like, what are they even asking for here? And if I don't really know what they're asking for, then it's really difficult to think about how I'm going to assess the learning, but also teach it, not only in my tier one instruction, but also if I were to try to intervene. So having these conversations and thinking about the use of our vertical alignment documents to think of that's tier one, but we have to have consistent, solid understanding of what that's even asking for. But then how do we use those vertical alignment documents to potentially think about both tier two, what skills might we need to reinforce, but maybe tier three for kids who are significantly behind? What little skills do we have to build, and who's going to do that delivery? In this particular case, and using this, that if what students, what if they're struggling, is using some of these things about how do we promote this? As I've said before, how do we promote what explicit instruction is? Which of those elements, if you're using Anita Archer's work, I mean, there are 16 elements. So how do we provide these opportunities to continue to think about, pick one of them, critical content, but what is the critical content? What does that look like? And practicing it and having the support for that. What does it mean to deliver a systematic instruction? What does it mean to scaffold instruction? If I don't have knowledge of what the standard is, then I may have no knowledge of the scaffolds. So whether I'm a teacher working with my peer colleagues, the input we can give to each other. If I'm a coach, the learning I could do to teach others about scaffolds that are necessary, the opportunities here to be up and monitoring. The poem in this particular case, this wasn't about getting to the end. This is how could I take each line? How could I take each stanza to provide that ongoing feedback so we don't get to the end and question, why didn't students understand? There's also what if students struggle? This is a website here that takes you to some of the most commonly used prefixes, suffixes, and roots, things that could be done here with students. If you took a look at any of the first stanza even, if you took a look, and I'll just give you a moment here to take a look at the first stanza or second or third or fourth, whichever one you want. What would you find in these different stanzas that would allow you to teach students or reinforce for students prefixes, suffixes, roots, anything in here where you would go to help students look at different parts of speech potentially? But I don't have to get a new text to do all of that. I have one really great mentor text that I could be using over and over and over again to teach so many different skills. So you're just kind of looking down through here. Prefixes, suffixes, roots, rivulets. We already talked about that of plural, furls as thinking about suffix, ing. There's many that we could be using throughout all of this, but this will take you there. There's also, I put a website at the very bottom, if you're not familiar with that, the etymology website. It's a great one to reinforce and to support people in terms of just understanding the different parts of certain words. So that's a great one to go to. There's also this from Motes and Tolman and part of the Reading Rocket of these different types of syllables. So if I were thinking about support that I would need to provide to individuals, well, what kind of syllables am I even finding here? So if I had students in a small group or I had students in a tier 2 group and we were working on, I need to reinforce some syllables. Well, what are the types of syllables that I would be finding? Well, if I look at the first stanza, I have this word past, let's say. We could look at that as a closed in by consonant. If I went down to the last part of that stanza, I have life. I can reinforce here as a being a vowel consonant E. There's freely that I have here as an open syllable, but you could take a moment here if you're introducing syllable types that maybe teachers have never learned. Maybe it's stuff that I need to learn, but I'm going to give you just a moment here to look at look at these 6-syllable types outlined there by Motes and Tolman, and then look at the poem and think about how you might use this to support someone. How could you use this to actually plan for a lesson? So take just a moment here to look down through one or more of the stanzas here and mark out the different syllables that you're seeing. Yep. Yeah, Beth, great. And that's a great one there in terms of looking. The how many syllables, that website at the very bottom, if you're not familiar with that, that's another place you go. You can go to howmanysyllables.com. You can enter in this vocabulary word. If someone needs support or assistance with this, but it shows the breaking where you would divide words into specific syllables. So, yep, rivulets. And then we could talk about we could talk as well about just those parts. Think of and connect this to the RIV, and the river, which probably many would be able to have that background knowledge there of connecting to. Anyone else want to share an example in here of a word or words that they could think about with syllable types? All right, then I'm gonna move to thinking about, yeah, for Caitlin, yeah, furls, memories. Another good thing, which I'm glad you put that up there, Caitlin, is one thing that Anita Archer would always say is like taking words back to their bases. So instead of teaching memories, taking that back to really thinking about memory, and being able to then reinforce and build the vocabulary development and the word family from that specific, or yeah, are controlled that you're looking at. So I want to just pause here then for a moment and to think about this. So we have this concept that we've covered in with student focused coaching as well, of thinking about professional development or professional learning. And when we think about these two concepts of how are we helping individuals really think through the learning. Professional development could be this one time. Uh, and it might be to where I'm really inspired and I'm energized and I've learned something. Yet if I don't keep practicing it, I might just go back to what I've always done. Versus the concept of professional learning is really thinking more about this deep understanding. Joyce and Showers in that early work, as I was sharing before, Joyce and Showers in this work of how important it is. If we're looking for long-term use, we have to really be considering here and thinking about how are we taking and providing these opportunities for the demonstrations and for the practice. So I want to pause here for just a moment. I want to open this up for some conversation here in terms of thus far what you're seeing of if you use this poem, what you would be thinking about in terms of this breakdown from a tier 1 to a tier 2 to a tier 3. What are you noticing here of how you could use this one text? And how long might you even use it? Any thoughts, comments here in terms of really thinking about this breakdown of the use of the text? More of the syllable words, yes, in tier 2. Sharing intentional supports, vocabulary, yes. Other thoughts here. How could you take just this one poem and break this one poem down into manageable chunks? Sustained professional learning opportunities.
I was just thinking to myself, like thinking about how you could tie this poem to even the reading rope, and thinking about what in the reading rope is getting in the way. And let's look at the word reading part first. And for which students would I need to think about supporting word reading? And how can I do that in small group? Maybe not even an intervention, but pulling some kids together to work on the word reading part. And then think about what are the other things within the reading rope that might be in the way for certain students in
Yeah.
pre-teaching it, so that then when we're really talking about that deep meaning making, they can fully engage in that and not think this isn't for me, you know?
Mm. Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. Uh, I'm wondering too, Caitlin, if Caitlin, would you mind talking a little bit more as well about your comment here of for tier two and your reason for maybe choosing to do what you said?
Yes, well, I'm a reading intervention teacher, so I do a lot of that anyway, and probably I've been really trying to use more challenging texts in intervention, rather than just sticking with decodables and whatnot. So I usually do sit down and pull out all the words that I think would be tricky for them, and sort of group them together by concepts like syllable types. And we go through those before we start to read a more challenging text.
Okay. All right. All right. Okay. What about using this as some sort of a mentor text? Anybody have any thought of using this as a mentor text? How long would you use it? What would you use it for? Any thoughts of using how this could be used as a mentor text? Mentor text. So if I were to take just this one as a mentor text, and I am using this routinely to teach multiple skills. So I could use this same text to teach imagery. I could use this same text to teach uh, connections and vocabulary. I could use this same text to model asking and answering questions. I could use this same text to think about determining importance. And so when we think about just a mentor text in general, if that's in tier two, tier three, I'm not having, even in tier one, I don't have to keep introducing students to new skills always with a new text. I'm using something that we become familiar with, and then we use it over and over and over again. So we're not always trying to build background knowledge about what the text is about. We're teaching a specific skill using a mentor text over and over, and then applying it to a new text that we might be then reading within our core program. So I could use it in poetry. Yeah, Lisa. This poem certainly could be used in poetry. Though when you think of all of the different skills in the comprehension continuum, though, think of all of the ways in which I could still use a poem to introduce students to the many different aspects here of comprehension. Uh, Evidence, I hope here for this particular piece, and the reason for choosing this piece is that my thinking here when prepping for this is if I were to come back to this collaborative problem solving process in our student focused coaching model, and if I were to think about, yeah, hey, someone came up with this defining a problem definition that was all about making inferences, it's still not going to be the place likely where I'm going to zone in with teachers. I likely am going to help people go back to some of those initial scaffolds and set goals of, hey, we're going to get to that, but we're going to start here coaching and working with other students. We're going to be starting based on this evidence. And that's going to mean we're going to have to build skills. So our goals might include, we're going to help a small group of students, an individual, a whole class, really understanding and thinking through this, being able to build capacity, being able to make connections, being able to accurately use vocabulary. So I might be having goals within our collaborative problem solving process. They're going to help us to get ultimately to this, but I'm not going to just hone in on making inferences. Our action plans also in roles of coaches is to then think through, if I were to use the collaborative problem solving process with others, is that I'm as a facilitator of this. You know, teachers take control over the work. I'm a support system in here, and the strategies that we might come up with in the action plan might include doing these demonstrations. It might include more time for practice. I might be a part of it, I might not be. But I also have to think about, if I'm a coach in my position, if I'm a coach, am I really helping people to understand the concepts or the skills that we're trying to introduce and to teach? Or are we going a little bit too fast? So if you were to think of right now in your own setting, in the school where you're working right now, or the district you're working in right now, and you had to pick a particular skill that students were struggling with in the area of comprehension, uh, what would it be? And what would be then your design, your system to help people think about, how do you now go through and teach these different skills? It's just something to ponder. It's something to think about in your role as a coach. So my goal here was to be able to provide you guys with some of these different resources and the connections to really reinforce and say how important it is to go back to standards, how important it is for us to be able to think about the common understanding and the teaching of standards, the clarity of standards. And if we don't have that knowledge base of each of those, in this case with the comprehension continuum, then it's going to be really difficult to then assess it. It's going to be really difficult then to actually teach and or think about those interventions. Our conversations that we have with colleagues when we think about the interventions we're going to try to provide, if I'm taking something like this, is that it's probably going to not be just in comprehension skills. It may have to be back to those things about the vocabulary, the syllable types, the morphology. How do we support our educators in really thinking through these different steps in terms of our work? And the last part here, really thinking that if we go back to that beginning about a healthy culture, if we go back to thinking about just the healthy culture in general, thinking about our systems, and within our own systems, how are we creating these spaces to support teachers in the planning out of these different levels of tiers? How are we helping to create these structures where we are learning together? This is a quote from Fullen and Hargreaves that I ask you to think about some of the key things that you take from this. The essence of system success. If you go and you use chat here for just a moment and think about what is a word or a phrase in this particular quote that you would say really get you thinking about system success. What is a word or a phrase that really stands out to you here? And how do you go about then ensuring that your system has this? So if you'd take just a moment and chat there, pick out a word or a phrase. Daily interaction. Elisa. Yeah, daily interaction of individuals throughout the system. Teachers with teachers, teachers with students, coaches with teachers, etc. Purposeful collaboration. From 2, daily, continuous, yes. Others thinking about a word or phrase here. Mutual trust. That important word, Kim, that I'm glad you put in here is the development. And development comes with the sustained opportunities for continuous learning. What you don't see in here, and that also comes from another leading scholar in his day, is from Rick DeFore. And what Rick DeFore and his wife Rebecca would say about professional learning communities is that we are doing what some of you just said in the chat here. There's purposeful collaboration, daily interaction. What they would also say that a professional learning community is not is a fixed time on a given day. That PLCs, they don't occur on Wednesdays from 2 until 2:45. A professional learning community is we are engaging in our work all the time. We're continuously learning together. And so if we were to take something, one text, work with your colleague, come up with one text that you can use, whether it's in math, science, social studies, English language arts, doesn't really matter. But how can we use that one piece routinely to help people understand that if we're planning for tier one instruction, this is how we could use this text and then apply it to their core programs that they have. If we're going to use this text to plan for tier two, how do we take this and provide opportunities for continuous practice, but to use this? And if we were to use something like this and thinking about our students who need that deep, intensive tier three intervention, how could we get kids to think about this text that they're encountering in an everyday setting in their tier one instruction, but really build those scaffolds and those skill sets they might be missing? I think often here, what you will find in some of these key things, I don't know if anybody has seen this book. I find this to be a really pretty good one here about multi-tier systems of support. This one was written by Rachel Brown Chidsey and Rebecca Bickford in 2016. But another really good piece where things are, it isn't about here. We have to be thinking about response to intervention, those features of effective instruction that we're using, the explicit instruction that we're using, but the system has to create what this stuff looks like. And it can't be everything all at one time and expecting everyone to understand what an MTSS model is all about. It's very complex. It's very difficult. But people need to be able to sort of think through, how is our system getting people ready to implement something like this? Yes, we can put that book in the chat here. I'd be interested here if anyone here in the last couple of minutes, any kind of general thoughts or thinking here of, based on this particular conversation and this presentation here and using one text, any general kind of takeaways? And that could be a question, it could be a confusion, it could be something I'm now thinking about in our system that we should probably work on. What is it? You can type that in chat or feel free to come off mute and to share this. But any ahas, insights, new things that you want to try? Yeah, Kim.
I was just gonna say is that we hear these things more than once, because I've heard, not this particular point, but about how to take a tier one passage and you can do it into tier two, but how often we have to do it, the number of times you have to do it to understand. And even us at the level that we are, how many times we've heard this, for us to understand and see the importance of doing and understanding, and even that to take this point in how it hit us in this session, how we could do this. Think about our students, how many times it takes for them. That was my thing. It hit that as many times as we have heard, have been through sessions and have heard this, and it still hit home.
Yeah.
With me today is that remembering how many times it takes our students, and really our struggling students.
Yeah. So important, Kim. And that's another thing that will come out of this book, but another thing through the work that I'm able to do with coaching and the MTSS plans and some of my work in Texas is that often this all these different programs or assessments that are used. And it's often when you think about this, like it's not so much about how many different programs do we have. When you start to think about, if I have a student who needs tier two, or as based on data is now going to be receiving tier two intervention, do I really want that student to go off and be working in a whole new curriculum, in a whole new set of strategies if they're already struggling? The thought that getting into a tier two intervention group, the ideal person is to have my teacher teaching that, because it's reinforcing what I was just doing in tier one instruction. It's just helping to build that knowledge. But the thought of sending kids off in tier two intervention to now go and learn a whole nother set of skills with someone else, it's asking these strugglers to go off and learn more skills than what was just previously taught. Uh, the other thing about, like, within even a tier three intervention, or if students do get pulled out for tier two, is the communication. Do we have the opportunities then for classroom teacher and these interventionists to be able to have the ongoing conversations to say, this is what I did in tier one, and have then the discussions about then what happens in tier two or tier three? Sending kids off to, again, learn new things, but we haven't even talked about it. It seems like it really puts kids sometimes at disadvantages. So if you have other people providing intervention, then what's the conversation? How often is this communication happening between the different teachers? There's also this, how many assessments are necessary to identify specific needs of what students are struggling with? Uh, and and do we really know how to use some of this data? I get to work with schools all over, and I get to hear teachers talk about, sometimes, I mean, there are many assessments, and I should use them all to guide my instruction. But I only ever received a quick overview of this assessment, and so I don't really know how to use it anyway. Or there's so many bells and whistles in this system that which report would be the one that I should start with? And then how do we use that on a routine basis? Uh, there are a lot of schools who use paraprofessionals as interventionists. Hey, they're another resource, but they have to be trained. And if I am putting my most struggling readers, my most struggling students in mathematics education with a paraprofessional not properly trained in teaching reading, teaching math, not knowing the scaffolds, I mean, what am I doing to really help to close their gaps? So the knowledge, as you're saying, Kim, the knowledge here of not just only for us, but to think about all of the educators whom we're working with, of just like classrooms and with students, that routine, it's initial distributed cumulative practice opportunities. And I think the same is true for many of what we do in schools. How do we provide for this ongoing support, initial distributed cumulative opportunities to support teachers in some specific areas of instruction to really close gaps and align tiers?
And the other thing I was going to say, is that we tend to overload teachers with programs for tiers outside of core instruction to fill gaps. Maybe if we worked with teachers how to scaffold tier one instruction, we could fill those gaps rather than trying to teach them additional programs.
Yeah,
And they could
yeah,
get more confident
you
with
bet.
the core program and learn how to scaffold down using those, like you said, with those standards, learn to scaffold those standards
Yeah,
rather than overloading
yeah.
with additional programs.
I completely agree with you. The thought of, like, if you're, and I mean, but if you're purchasing a new program and there's a purpose for purchasing the program, as long as people receive the ongoing training, it can't just be you receive this one day of training and now all of a sudden you're an expert. Uh, what's the ongoing training going to be, and who's going to be providing that ongoing follow-up? So just layering programs and assessments onto already busy teachers without taking things away and providing the sustained work, I don't think it's really going to help anyone. It's getting ourselves really focused and getting ourselves a great plan to be able to study and to demonstrate and to practice routinely and consistently.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for that. We're gonna need to close this session down to go to the next one. But I really appreciate this conversation. I got so much information that I'm gonna be taking for our next training in January that we're doing some districts, really about talking about how are we supporting students across all tiers, and that the purpose of MTSS is not to sort kids into piles and leave them there, but to give them the support they need to access that grade level content. So I got so many great ideas.